Well, the economy is expected to face further headwinds in the year ahead. To discuss the latest Westpac economic report, acting chief economist Michael Gordon is with us. Thanks for joining us, Michael. So, what's your outlook for economic growth?
Well, it's certainly looking like leaner growth than we were thinking a few months ago. Part of that, I think, is reflecting the way that the global picture has gone as well, with just, I guess, a sort of series of shocks. And also, everyone is tightening monetary policy at the moment. So they are all looking to take the heat out of their own economies too. And it's very much the story here as well. So there's, with the benefit, I think, of a few more months of seeing what's going on, there's a bit more sign now of that process being underway. We've seen what it's done to the housing market for quite a while now. There's now a bit more of a sign that it's coming through in consumer spending patterns between that and the kind of rising costs. And even sort of very early sniff that things are easing up a bit in the labour market. So things are underway to kind of bring those inflation pressures under control, but it's not going to be quick or painless by any means.
No, and you're expecting inflation to get back into that target band in another 12 months or so.
Yeah, it's still essentially above the Reserve Bank's target certainly through this year and even through most of next year. And it's not really until 2024 that we have it back under control on a sustained basis. So certainly very much so in the near term, there's still, I think, some pain to come through in terms of living costs. Wage growth on average is starting to catch up with that a bit. So the gap's narrowing, but I don't think that your typical household is kind of gonna end up ahead of this. I think we've still had, essentially a shock to the whole economy's productive capacity, and unfortunately, someone has to wear that. It's just a question of how the pain gets distributed.
Well, you're expecting the OCR to hit somewhere around 4%, are you?
Yeah, so I mean, obviously subject to whatever the Reserve Bank says coming up in its review later this week. But that's something we decided probably a couple of weeks ago, just assessing the extent of what's needed, in particular, some of that labour market pressure is starting to sort of gain some momentum. So our thought was that the Reserve Bank already had something like a 4% peak in mind. It's at this point it's getting hard to argue that they will not do something that is on their minds when the evidence has generally been pointing in the direction of doing that.
And I guess are you out of step, I guess, with your colleagues at other banks? They're thinking a peak of about 3.5%.
It varies. So some people have a lower peak, some have higher. Obviously, it'll be in a couple of days' time we'll find out who was on the right side of things. But I guess it's interesting that the kind of the sentiment has been going in the other direction recently. So it wasn't that long ago, financial markets and here and around the world were pricing in ever higher interest rates, getting super panicked about inflation. Now it's got a recession talk seems to be dominating the world. And if anything, what's priced into financial markets here is actually a peak lower than 3%. So the kind of the sentiment has been shifting quite a bit recently. That's the nature of financial markets. They're trying to anticipate the next move, and I think if anything, they're probably being a bit ahead of themselves in terms of trying to pick when the first interest rate cuts will happen. The Reserve Bank's task is not just to get interest rates up; they've got to keep them in place for long enough to have the braking effect that's needed.
Are you forecasting a recession at all?
No, and that's actually very much a minority view among forecasters. Not to say that forecasters are perfect, but just to highlighting that it is the range of forecasts out there that I've seen sort of ranges from close to zero to something positive. There's no one forecasting anything more than a quarter or two of going backwards. What we are forecasting, though, is really a period of quite lean growth, and especially in consumer spending, because that's where a lot of the adjustment's going to have to come through. There will be some positives at the same time, and one of the big ones is the reopening of the border and the resumption of tourism. We've been missing, on balance, about 1.5% of our economy for the last couple of years, and even if that doesn't come back straight away, still going from nothing to something is enough to move the dial on the wider economy.
What about inflation matched with wage inflation? Are you expecting it to be like for like at some point?
Well, I think that the nature of inflation is going to be shifting a bit. So a lot of it to date has been international shocks. Not all of it. It has been a combination of what's happening worldwide and the pressures here. But probably more of it to date has been these international shocks. So it is things like rising oil and other commodity prices, shipping costs, and so on. That kind of stuff is probably going to be easing off in the year ahead. Not necessarily prices falling a lot, but at the least, they're not going to be rising at the same pace as before. So in the year or so ahead, we're expecting overall inflation to be lower than it is now. But at the same time, the makeup of it is going to be much more driven by domestic forces. And in particular, it's going to be much more tied to wage growth. So I think we probably will see a period where we move into positive real wage growth, as we put it. So wages rising faster than inflation. But that's actually because more of the adjustment will be coming from the inflation side, and probably to a smaller degree from the higher wage growth side.
So will people be getting more money in their back pockets for the jobs they're doing?
Well, I mean, we're forecasting wage growth the rate of wage growth I don't think has peaked from here. It does tend to be the most lagging part of the economic cycle anyway. So it's probably really in the last couple of the quarterly releases that we've been able to look at it and say this thing's actually gaining some momentum from an economy that was running above pre-COVID levels of activity right from back in 2020. So it's taken a while to come through, and I think that momentum still has a while to go. So even if this is as far as we go in terms of the unemployment rate, we do expect it to rise a bit gradually from here. It's still really low. It's still going to be applying that pressure, that difficulty of finding workers. It's just maybe we're probably getting close to peak intensity for that.
Well, with the open borders, will we see a flux of people here to come and work?
I think it'll be a combination of things. I think probably important to emphasize that both the inflows and outflows, I think, will be picking up as the border. In fact, we've had a few months of experience of that already, and that's been the effect of it. Yes, there are more New Zealanders leaving. There were already actually quite a few New Zealanders leaving even before the border rules changed, because that was about other countries' rules, not our own. But I think we're going to see a pickup in flows in both directions. But probably where the real swing factor is going to be is in the arrivals of foreigners, because that's the one leg that's been quite depressed so far. So that's actually the one that's got the most room to spring back. So I actually do think we will be moving into a positive migration balance over the year or so ahead. And it's just important to keep in mind. Yes, we all know someone who's going off on the OE and so on. The OE is just one leg of the total, and it's nowhere near the most important one.
Will those people entering the country have the skill sets that the country's economy desperately needs?
We will see. I mean, certainly, in the meantime, we have had this reset of migration policy, so it's not going to be as freewheeling as it was before. I know the intention is to focus on attracting, skills that are in strong demand, and try to avoid the kind of, attracting a lot of people into the fairly low value jobs. I still don't know that it's quite fit for purpose, really. This migration policy still has a very strong focus on attracting skills, and it tends to ignore the fact that family and lifestyle is also going to be a factor in where those highly skilled migrants choose to move in the world.
Michael Gordon, thanks for joining us.